What's going on, everybody? Welcome into the Lakers Outsiders podcast. Gary Kessler here with you as always. We have a very special guest with us today. And if you're a Laker fan, you should already know of his work. He does excellent work over at LakerFilmRoom.com. You know him on Twitter also at Laker Film Room. Pete Zayas joins us today. Pete, thank you so much for coming on with us. We really appreciate the time. How you been?
I'm good, man. It's good to see you, Gary. How you been, man? You were so good to me last year. You were the first guy at Summer League where I was like, can I hang out with somebody? And yeah, man, let's watch a game together. You were real cool to me, man. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, man, it was a blast watching games with you, but at the same time, I hated it because you made me feel kind of stupid, like basketball illiterate, somewhat. So, made me realize I was like, man, I got a lot to learn still about this stuff, about basketball.
Man, we all do.
No, but I do appreciate you coming on. We got a lot to talk about today about the NBA draft. Jacob Root is also joining us today. Jacob, how excited are you for Summer League? Are you excited as the two of us are?
I made the mistake of booking everything a couple weeks ago, and then it just made time slow down to just a crawl. So now it's just I'm counting down the days, and oh man, I'm so excited to go back.
Yeah, I'm counting down the days. I'm ready. Let's do this thing. But first and foremost, we got the draft to get through. We still don't know for sure who the Lakers are going to have with the number 2 pick and then the 28th pick, if they indeed stay at those two spots. Pete, I'm just going to ask you first and foremost. There's been so many rumors around Lonzo Ball and Josh Jackson, especially as of late. What do you make of all this? Do you think this is the Lakers just kind of blowing smoke and kind of trying to keep teams off balance, or do you think there's some legitimate divide on who to pick with the second pick in the draft?
No, I think there's a legitimate contingent within the Laker front office that likes Jackson, and I think there's discussions being had, and I don't think that they've made their decision as of yet. You know, the thing that we forget is these front offices and the Laker front office in particular is made up of a collection of people, right? And we just think of Magic and Pelinka, and at the end of the day, they're going to be the decision makers on that. But they're having a bunch of guys underneath them that are all lifetime basketball men that have their own opinions, right? So one guy might think Lonzo's overrated, right? Another guy might love Josh Jackson. Another guy might be jumping on the table for Lonzo, you know? And so what we hear from people, for me, I'm always skeptical when we read reports of the Lakers are thinking this, because the Lakers are they're not one person. The Laker front office is not one person. Unless you got a direct line into Magic, there's no, you can't say for sure what the Lakers are going to do. So at the end of the day, I do think they're going to end up picking Lonzo for a variety of reasons. But, this time a month ago, we were tripping out on whether or not they were going to keep the pick at all. And Josh Jackson, for me, was my number one guy this time a year ago in this draft. So, I mean, it's a pretty damn good choice that we're faced with as Laker fans. And my preference is Lonzo, and I think that's where they're going to go. But I do think that there's strong support for Jackson.
Yeah, it's been really interesting because, and I've kind of talked a little bit about this with a number of people in recent days about this, and I guess it kind of depends on what you value more. We've seen the Golden State Warriors. They're just an offensive machine. They have so much talent, but they execute so well because they have so much shooting. They have guys that can create for one another. They're unselfish, and play the game the right way. Despite their talent obviously does so many things for them, but the fact that they execute so well is a big reason why they just steamroll through the playoffs. So a big part of this debate, and Jacob, Hani and I talked about this on the last podcast, but what do you value more in this type of situation where you add Jackson? You're probably valuing more defensive versatility where you can switch a lot more things if you pair him next to Brandon Ingram, or do you value the floor spacing that you get with Lonzo and the passing and the creation and all that stuff?
I honestly kind of flip-flop on this pretty much every day. In general, I'm kind of a person who values defense more, but you also don't get prospects like Lonzo Ball coming along very often. I mean, he's just kind of even if he's not necessarily the best prospect in this class, he's a one of a kind type of prospect that you really just don't see kind of come through. And I mean, and it's really hard. I mean, to me, this is this is basically a 50-50. I mean, Lonzo will come in day one and provide kind of the spacing and the shooting and the playmaking that the Lakers badly needed, especially when D'Angelo wasn't out there whenever he was hurt last year. But I mean, you bring in Jackson, and you're looking at a kind of a wing tandem for the future of Jackson and Ingram, and that, I mean, it's almost similar in ways to what KD and Iguodala bring to the table. That's kind of the visions you get way down the road in the best case scenario type of thing. But I mean, it's hard to pick between the two because they're kind of the different prospects. Like you said, one brings more of an offensive approach to the table and the other more of a defensive one. But I mean, generally I'm more of a defensive guy, and basically the way I'm leaning today, I'm leaning a bit more toward Jackson, but you ask me tomorrow and I might be leaning toward Lonzo.
The point regarding defense is interesting in that I mean, we're all going to agree, yeah, defense is extremely important. There's the tried and true saying of defense win championships and whatnot. But my question is, how do you go about acquiring it? Right? How do you go about accomplishing that? We watched, the four starting guards in these NBA finals. None of them were drafted with the idea in mind that they were going to be plus defenders, right? And the guys who, even Kevin Durant was not drafted necessarily with that in mind. Those guys were all drafted because they could shoot and they could score. The guys who make a defensive difference are your Draymonds, your Iguodalas to an extent, even though he's getting older. And Clay grew into that role as an on-ball defender, but he wasn't necessarily that coming out. So my question is that is there anybody who's really changing games with their individual defense? And secondly, do you draft that at number 2?
I would say there's a select few, like your defensive player of the year candidates, like your Rudy Gobert's, your Kawhi Leonard's, your Draymond Green's. But when you look at those guys, they're so unique defensively. Like Kawhi is just a machine on both ends of the floor. But then when you got like Rudy Gobert, a guy that's that big, that long and athletic, he's really physically, he's kind of a unicorn. Like guys like that just don't come around very often. And then Draymond Green, is a guy that can seriously guard 1 through 5. And those guys are also very rare. So, with Jackson, I get the defensive versatility because I think, he's going to be able to guard multiple positions, fairly effectively pretty early on. Although I'm a big believer in keeping expectations low with young players when it comes to defensively. Because I think we saw with the Minnesota Timberwolves, I think a lot of people expected them to be a pretty good defensive team with Tom Thibodeau in there, and you got Karl Anthony Towns and Wiggins and all these young guys, but they still struggled a lot throughout the year defensively. So it's really tough for young guys I don't know. I feel like defensively it's a steep learning curve, but I think it's also one that's a little more teachable than shooting. And the thing with me that's always interesting is that a lot of people kind of treat shooting as if it's an easier skill to learn than defense. And I feel like the rare examples get pointed out, like Kawhi Leonard again, for example, came in not a great shooter and now is a very effective perimeter shooter. But how many guys come in with that sort of expectation and don't pan out for so for every Kawhi Leonard that you get, how many guys you get that just didn't develop their shot? So for me personally, I would take the offense, and I think you can it's a little bit easier to teach defense, but maybe that's just me.
Well, and defense is so dependent upon the entirety of your team. I'm actually of the belief that the culture of your team is really what, and obviously you have to have a competent scheme and all of that. But right. I think, if you put most guys in a highly competitive environment where there's something at stake, I'm not talking about a tanking team in late March that, guys aren't going to rotate over from the weak side. But if they're in the playoffs, guys, it's way more focus and attention to detail, whereas the offensive end of the court, a lot of it's skill. We've been touting all year Brandon Ingram's work ethic, and that was something that was touted prior to the season. He still shot really badly this year, especially from distance and from the free throw line. So it isn't something where you just take a well-meaning kid, put him in the gym for a long time with NBA level coaches, and then it gets fixed. There was a great piece by Blake Griffin on the Players Tribune where he talked about changing the mechanics of his shot. And he was like, I worked on it, and it was like 3 years until he felt comfortable with where his shot was, and it really improved, because there's so much unlearning that needs to be doing, so much muscle memory of an old form, and you have to really break it down piece by piece. And there are a lot of guys, like you said, Gary, that just stay bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like you said, it's a lot of unlearning. I mean, a lot of these guys have been shooting this way for several years, and to change it all of a sudden, like, yeah, that takes a lot of time. That's not something that happens overnight, unless, very, very rarely does that kind of happen. So you mentioned, getting back to the prospects here, Pete, you mentioned the culture, and I'm kind of curious as to your thoughts on this, because we saw Lonzo Ball kind of help reshape the culture at UCLA this year. They went from a team, I believe, that was under 500 to a national championship contender. Do you believe, because we've seen Rob Pelinka and Magic Johnson really talk and use the word excellence. They command excellence every day. That's kind of their new mindset, and I love that. Do you think a guy like Lonzo Ball, there's a better chance that he can kind of shape the offensive culture with his unselfishness, his ball movement, his smart decision making, or a guy like Josh Jackson kind of single-handedly can start to reshape the defensive culture, and that makes just kind of things easier for them on that end? Like, what of those two do you think is more likely?
Man, I think we're in good shape on either end. I think that both Lonzo and Jackson are really good culture guys. Jackson plays really hard, and while Lonzo is my preference, Jackson's going to be a guy that's really easy to root for. He's a fantastic athlete. He's got a great motor, plays very hard, and he has really, really, really underrated basketball IQ. Mm-hmm. I feel like a lot of times we don't, the guys who are really good athletes, we can overlook how smart they are. But to me, that's why he aligns so much with an Iguodala, right? It's because he's a very intelligent player who's also athletic and can't shoot all that well, although he shot better in the second half of the year. Whereas I don't know if the Laker defensive problems last year, I didn't like our scheme in a lot of senses. I thought we were rotating on the perimeter from the wrong places. And, one of my buddies, as he rightfully puts it, he says, if you're rotating in the first place, something broke down earlier in the play. And so I don't think it's simply a function of effort, but I think Jackson's going to be the guy that's getting you 50-50 balls. I think he's going to elevate almost kind of, a rich man's David Nwaba, right? When Nwaba would come into the game, you'd see everything pick up a little bit. And Corey Brewer, bless his heart, with his bonsai runs to the basket and whatnot, he played with that level of intensity, right? And so, he is going to be capable of doing that. On the other hand, Lonzo infects everybody offensively with that extra pass mentality. And I feel like Russell, Ingram, and Randall specifically, and I've seen a little from Zubats even, they all have, and Nance as well, they all have passing ability, but they can get caught up in one-on-one type of play. Not Nance and Zubats so much, but the higher draft picks. They can get caught up in a one-on-one type of style. And I feel like Lonzo kind of gives them permission, or sets precedent, is a better phrase, to make that extra pass, which they're totally capable of, but to be able to do that on a play-by-play basis.
And Lonzo's the type of guy who guys want to kind of pass and then cut because they know Lonzo will find them. And I think, to a certain degree, D'Angelo kind of fits that bill too, but guys want to pass the ball and start kind of moving and cutting, which I think is what Luke wants the offense to get to, is something more like the Warriors, of kind of pass and cut and screen and stuff like that. But I do agree as well that Jackson, he does so many of the small things that kind of go unnoticed at times. There were times, I can't remember, I believe it was the game Kansas played against Purdue, where there were so many times where he dropped down just at the perfect time and kind of helped steal the ball away from Swanigan and stuff like that, just doubling down on the post at the right time and timing his rebounds at the right time and stuff like that there's a lot of value to a guy who can do that, like you. And I mean, you like you said, I mean, he's in ways kind of a rich man's David Nwaba. I mean, he's that feisty guy that'll go out there and he can kind of be. I think to a certain degree, this team's kind of missing a vocal leader in a way. I think they want D'Angelo to be that, but he hasn't really consistently shown that. And Jackson's the type of guy that can take charge of a defense and yell out, where people are going, where people need to be. And there's a lot of value in that and having a guy out there who will just kind of take charge of the situation.
If Jackson was a big, I'd be more comfortable with that, because most of the time, when you're a good defense, you have a 4 or a 5 who's capable of, and it's similar to the point guard position on the offensive end in that when you're on that back line, you can see everybody, right? So if there's a cutter, if you're defending on ball 24 feet away, there are 8 guys behind you that you don't see, and maybe you see somebody in your periphery. But Jackson is a wing defender. I think that he'll be capable of doing what he can, but I'm not sure he can have as big of an impact from the 2 or 3 position defensively and from a team perspective. But he's absolutely, like you said, Jacob, he's going to do what needs to get done to try to win the game. And that's something that, Lakers are in a great spot having this pick, because, either way, they're going to get a guy who really contributes toward wins and can be a leader. I don't think D'Angelo is the future leader of this team. I think he's a guy that's extremely talented, that can get buckets and can pass the ball. And I don't think everybody needs to be a leader, right? Like, we watched Kyrie Irving just get buckets in the finals, right? And he was criticized for all the same things that D'Angelo gets criticized for now. But ultimately, I think Lonzo can take control of the offense, and I do think Jackson can, his attitude and motor can permeate the team. But I think that's going to be a little more difficult when he's not a guy that you can necessarily put the ball in his hands and say, create a shot.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. I guess with these 2 prospects, because they seem to be the 2 clear front runners right now. Pete, what concerns do you have about each one? For me, the big one with Jackson is his shot. I feel like mechanically there's just a lot that needs to be fixed about it, and I'm really, really worried about him shooting from NBA range. I know he was a pretty good 3-point shooter percentage-wise last year at Kansas. I think he was at 37%. But I feel like that shot really, really worries me, and I think, the Lakers badly need shooters. They need space to operate with the collection of big men that they have on the roster. With Jackson, like, I guess, and Lonzo, what are your biggest concerns for each one of those guys?
So Jackson, the shot is part of it, but for me, even that's only scratching the surface of his offensive concerns for me, because just his shot, like, that's what gets him to a 3-and-D type player, right? And that's before we get into, he got a lot of garbage baskets with Kansas, which isn't an insult. That's a talent in and of itself. But I didn't see in the video work that I did on him, I didn't see a ton of scores out of triple threat, out of isolation, out of pick and roll play. He played power forward primarily for Kansas, and he's going to transition into a pretty different role as well. His points per possession in the pick and roll, I think, were 0.54. He shot worse on his 2-point jumpers than he did on his 3-point jumpers, which, from 3 he was at 38%, and I think he was mid-30s on his 2-point jumper. So scoring outside of the paint is, he has difficulty with that. So that's my biggest question with Jackson is, how's he going to be able to score in the NBA? His defensive analytics aren't great, but I do agree with the general sentiment that he's going to be a very good defender coming down the line. And overall, I probably like Jackson more than the impression that I give off on Twitter and in other places. And I probably like Lonzo less, but you got to pick one, right? And that's why I've kind of staked my claim to Lonzo over this last week. With Lonzo, I have concerns about his ability to score, in that I had an article come out this week about how we're looking at his weaknesses wrong. And I'm contradicting myself a little bit in this respect, but he's going to see, primarily with the Lakers big man shooters that you alluded to, Gary, he's going to see soft hedge or drop coverages, or he's going to get switched on the pick and roll. to put it in simple, plain English, NBA coaches are going to say, Lonzo, you're going to be the guy that we leave open. You're going to be the guy that needs to score on us, put up 30 on us. And my concern is his capability to be able to do that. He has pretty rudimentary handles. He doesn't have a great inside-out dribble. He doesn't have a lot of combo moves. It's very simple, shoot it and move it type of style of play, which is great. I think it fits in, but I also think he's more of a shooting guard in the half court than he is a point guard. And if he's put in a lot of pick and roll situations, which the Lakers ran the fourth most pick and rolls of any team in the league last year, he's going to be learning how to do that on the NBA level, and that's really tough.
Yeah. Oh, Jacob, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, just kind of building off both of your points. If you draft, starting with Jackson, if you draft Jackson, you're putting a lot of faith into either him or Ingram becoming good to great three-point shooters, which we just talked about. Somebody kind of develop a consistent three-pointer when there's a lot of issues. I mean, Ingram was a good three-point shooter and there last year. Maybe it comes around, but still you're putting a lot of faith into – I mean, one of them probably has to become a high 30s three-point shooter and the other one probably mid-30s at the worst. And then, like you said, going to Lonzo, I mean, I don't remember the numbers. I know I've heard them, but he basically just didn't run the pick and roll last year, or not a whole lot at least. And when he did, I mean, it was always kind of passing out of it and things like that. Like you said, we saw D'Angelo last year kind of in the summer league and preseason just absolutely destroy teams who soft hedged on him. And I can't recall one instance of seeing Lonzo do anything kind of close to that as to what D'Angelo did against a soft hedge, just kind of pulling up, either putting his man in jail kind of on his hip or just pulling up and just burying the shot.
Yeah, it's – I don't know. One thing I wanted to get to because I've been thinking about this all day, and I don't know why this thought kind of popped into my head, but in a weird way, I can't help but think like how Laker management, how this new regime thinks of Julius Randle. I don't know, maybe I'm crazy, but what do you guys think on this? But do you think their thoughts on Julius Randle can factor into this decision? Like, there's been so much talk about Paul George coming over next summer, and that sounds like a real possibility. Although I'm taking it with a grain of salt because the Lakers haven't signed anybody major like that since Shaq. So, but I mean, the thing with Randle is that he's going to be a free agent, restricted free agent after this season, right? So with Jackson, and say you sign Paul George, I mean, you kind of have an odd man out, right? So do you think, I mean, with Randle kind of being there and some uncertainty there, Pete, do you think that impacts kind of their decision and maybe that might favor Lonzo a little bit?
Well, I think that the shooting, the overall shooting of the team is going to be something that factors in. That's something that Pelinka has mentioned. In terms of Randle specifically, we're playing a bit of a game of telephone here, but from the people I'm able to talk to that are able to talk to people in the Laker organization and just in the NBA in general, there's much more of a move toward positionless basketball, and the kind of holy grail is the two-way wing, right? Who can switch everything. You gotta, like 30 years ago, Pat Riley said, someday basketball is going to be 5'6'9" guys on the court that can handle, shoot, and defend. And that's proved to be prophetic in a lot of ways. When you see, the Warriors death lineup, we saw LeBron and KD playing center a lot. And what we don't talk about a lot on the other end is the small guys can have problems defensively. And this is something that, so for a lot of teams and decision makers, my understanding is that if they can put 5 guys out on the court that are like Riley said, 6'9" and can handle, shoot, and defend and switch everything, that's kind of what they're going for. So Randle being 6'9", 250 with ball handling ability. We're all crossing our fingers about his shooting. He looks great in all of the, workout video, working in back alleys or whatever the heck he's doing, right? Like he looks.
He's become the Hulk.
Right. Yeah, no, he looks great, man. And I think the idea would be to put Randall out there with Paul George, with Josh Jackson, with Brandon Ingram, and have 5 guys who can handle the rock but can switch everything and blow up your screen. Because that's what switching does effectively from an X's and O's standpoint, is if you can do that effectively, it blows up your screening game. And the league's so screen heavy right now that if you can take a team out of their screening game and say, hey, you got to score on us one-on-one in isolation situations, it's a different ballgame.
Yeah, and having that versatility. I mean, because the Lakers for so long, I feel like ever since I started watching them through every coach and everything, they're for the most part, not all the time, but it seems like they want to switch so many things especially with the pick and roll. Like even with when they had Powell and Andrew Bynum, it seemed like they switched so much with the pick and rolls and it created a lot of mismatches and things like that. And some of that always drove me nuts. But if you can have a lineup, Pete, like you were saying, with like a Paul George, Brandon Ingram, Josh Jackson, like guys that you can legitimately just switch just about anything. Then I think that makes Luke Walton's job a lot easier. Obviously, makes it a lot easier to scheme and kind of game plan for a lot of different things, and especially with the way that the game is going and is already there if you're a team like Golden State. So yeah, there's tremendous value in that. Do you think, Pete? Do you think we're kind of under, I guess, like kind of short selling Lonzo Ball's defense a little bit? Because I think. I don't think he's a great defender by any means at this point, but he's very young, and like we mentioned earlier, that's something that is definitely something that can be learned. Do you think? I mean, we're kind of short selling it a little bit, having two guard your backcourt be 2 guys that are 6'5". That gives you a little bit more ability to switch things than say if the Lakers drafted a guy like Dennis Smith Jr., a guy that's like 6'1".
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. I strongly believe that Lonzo is an underrated defender. I think he's more suited to guard the 2 and the 3 than he is kind of the water bug point guard types. I don't like how he lays on screens, but I also think that guard defense is, I don't know, man. Even, and I hate to refer everything back to the NBA Finals, right? Because it expands beyond that. But for all of the accolades that we've given Klay Thompson on the defensive end, I saw Kyrie do whatever he wanted to him, and you can, your guard defense can be screened out of a play, and effectively in a lot of ways. One thing we don't talk about enough is Lonzo's a really good defensive rebounder. And if you want to switch, what ends up happening, we think about the big guarding the guard up front, but what happens is as soon as you switch, if you got a size mismatch, that big is going to walk that guard all the way down under the basket. And that's where the Warriors have been vulnerable in the past, is giving up offensive rebounds. And that was something they really went out of their way to neutralize Tristan Thompson, and having a basically 7-foot Kevin Durant it really helped with that a lot as well. But Lonzo, I think, projects as a superb off-ball defender, for the same reason that he's a great passer and makes these has kind of passes guys open and has this great court vision. The same thing's happening on the defensive end, right? Where he's just seeing things a split second faster than everybody else does and can anticipate them. And unlike maybe a D'Angelo Russell, for example, he can shoot that passing lane. He's got a little more athleticism to be able to jump that and get that steal. There were a couple plays against Markelle Fultz, if you watch the game, their matchup, where he fought over a screen on Fultz, blocked his shot, or forced him into a turnover out of bounds. Like these really nice athletic plays, and then off of the ball, jump in passing lanes and getting a run out for a dunk. So yeah, I think Lonzo is underrated in that respect. And I do think that, to put it simply, I will take the trade-off of Lonzo plus the shooting ability with his switchability over the slightly better switchability that Jackson has, with the big question marks that I have about his shooting.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Jacob, you were talking about kind of leaning towards Jackson, and there's definitely some sentiment there, because Hani said the same thing on the last podcast. So it goes back to, like I was saying earlier, just kind of what you value more, with like the defensive, greater defensive versatility, or kind of the better, offensive, like the execution, the passing, shooting, all the spacing, and all that stuff. But Pete, you mentioned Markelle Fultz, and since I've got you here, I gotta ask you about him, even though it's probably very unlikely that he's on the board when the Lakers are on the clock at number 2. If the Lakers had the number 1 pick, would he be the guy, or would you still be seriously considering Lonzo Ball or Josh Jackson in that spot?
I can't speak to what the Lakers would do, but Fultz would be my pick. I think Fultz is the best guard prospect to come out since Kyrie in 2011. I think he's and the difference now. I would listen to Lonzo. I would listen to debates and because even statistically, Lonzo is the stronger prospect between the two. I just think that the way Fultz gets it done is exactly the same way that a lot of very successful guards do. And I have no questions about his ability to score on the pick and roll. Washington's coaching, I'm telling you, Gary, that was the worst coaching. And I have a healthy respect for how much these guys know, what they've been through, that I'm a peon compared to them in my basketball knowledge. That was a travesty against modern basketball on both ends of the court. And you know what he shot on uncontested 3-pointers this year?
Mm-mm.
He shot 4 for 7.
I was ready to say, did he even have any?
He shot 7, Jacob. He shot 7 uncontested threes this year. That's how open they got that kid. And
I couldn't name you one of his teammates, and I watched them 3 or 4 times this year.
And it wasn't just bad talent; it was poorly coached bad talent. Like their 2-3 zone was the worst. Anyway, I could tangent on this easily, but Fultz. I don't. That's all to say that I don't hold Washington's record against him. The bit of information that we don't have. I was talking to Mike Schmitz about this on our podcast recently. The bit that we miss as fans is that we don't know these kids as people, right? A lot of the scouts have been around them since their AAU days, sophomores, juniors in high school. They know these kids in a way that we don't. So I don't know the answer to the questions about Fultz's competitiveness, his fire, and whatnot. But from purely a skill set standpoint, yeah, you take that kid and you go, running for the hills.
Yeah, I often wondered this year how many games Washington would have won if they didn't have Markelle Fultz this year. I mean, it'd
been single digits easily.
I mean, it was already single digits, wasn't it?
Was it?
They were 9-22, I think. Yeah.
Oh, they wouldn't have won a game this year then.
It's watching their games. I mean, it was, Pete, like you said, it was just tough. It was tough to watch. Just the
felt
talent.
Bad for him at times watching.
Absolutely.
Him.
Yeah, it's. I don't know what they did. They must have gotten to Markelle Fultz very early in the recruiting process. Because man, he was on an island out there. But no, I would agree. I mean, like if by some divine miracle the Celtics pick anybody else besides Markelle Fultz at number 1, I don't think you can pass on him at number 2, no matter how much you like. You might like Lonzo or Josh Jackson or whoever. And the thing with Fultz too, he's still super young. Like, I think he just turned 19, like maybe a couple weeks ago or something like that.
I think it was this week. Yeah, no, he
literally just turned 19.
Yeah. That's crazy. These kids are just so young, and he's so talented. So we talked about the top 3 guys, and I think for most people, those are the consensus top 3. And Pete, I'll throw this to you first, and Jacob, you can add on after this. But if you could pick a guy, like you're the GM of the Lakers, and if you don't pick any of those 3 at number 2, like what's one player that you would give us? I mean, a serious look. For me, I'm a big fan of Dennis Smith Jr. Picking him at number 2 is probably a little high to me, but like Pete, who's the guy outside of those top 3 that you really, really like?
I'm also a big Dennis Smith Jr. fan. I think he's a 3-level scorer that that can operate really effectively off of the pick and roll. I look at some of the mock drafts and I see where he is, and I've been watching enough of these to know how dumb my opinions are going to sound in a year or in 2 years, on a lot of these things. But on the things that I tend to feel really strongly about, I feel good about my track record on those. Like Dennis Smith Jr. looks a lot to me like an all-star caliber type of guard. Now, that's not necessarily prediction on my end, but when you're talking about him going 8 or 10 or something like that, like, no, man, those guys are hard to come by. And so he's a guy. I actually have him 3 on my board. I have him ahead of Jackson. That's how much I like Dennis Smith.
I feel so much better about that now because I've been getting so much heat for having him going 3rd in my mock draft to the Sixers. But I mean, not that, it certainly might not happen, but yeah, no, I have him that high too. And I've gotten a lot of heat for it.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of his. And the other guy that I like is Malik Monk. I think Monk is going to score and score and score and score. He's one of the best. And so this goes back to Jackson a little bit, but sometimes there are guys where you don't see their full repertoire in college, right? Like Devin Booker comes into the NBA. It's like, holy crap, he can handle the ball like that, and for me, like the argument for Josh Jackson is along those lines, right? Where he didn't really have a chance to show off all he could do playing the 4 for Kansas. And my argument against that would be like, well, when he did, his numbers were pretty bad, even in small samples. But like a guy like Monk is in the 94th percentile as a pick and roll ball handler. He didn't get to do it that often at Kentucky, but I tweeted out the other day that he's my leader for the guy from Kentucky who can do more things than you thought he could award, like Towns shooting threes and Devin Booker being able to handle the ball. And so those are the 2 guys I actually have. So I have my top 5 right now is Fultz, Lonzo, Dennis Smith Jr. at 3, and it's real close between Jackson and Monk for the 4 spot for me.
Well, now I feel much better because I've been really high on Monk too. So
you
really pleased both of us with that answer.
How surprised are you guys that that Malik Monk hasn't really gotten, like, it seemed like, any consideration for the Lakers with the number 2 pick? Obviously, it's pretty high, I think, for him considering just the other guys in the draft. But I'm still a little bit surprised that there hasn't really been like any kind of chatter or any talk about that, considering they need another guard and they need a guy that can really shoot the ball. And as a North Carolina fan, I saw that he could shoot the ball. He dropped 47 on them early in the season. But I'm kind of surprised that there hasn't been like any chatter, to at least from what I've seen, like whatsoever, that he might be a possibility, like an outside possibility at number 2.
Well, you'd be putting, if you draft him at number 2, you'd be putting a lot into kind of what Pete said, and that the guy from Kentucky who can do more than Cal lets him. But I mean, there is some kind of credence to that. I mean, Cal has a history of kind of pigeonholing his 2 guards into just being kind of catch and shoot guys without really letting them create, with whether it was Booker or Murray, guys like that. So, but I mean, I don't necessarily think it'd be terrible just because he's like an elite shot maker from all different areas of the court, especially 3-point range, and that is a skill that's going to translate regardless of what happens. So with how few shot makers the Lakers had, and the one probably best one, and Nick Young leaving, I guess it is a little surprising that I don't even think the Lakers worked him out, or at least I haven't seen it. So, but when you have guys like Lonzo and Jackson there, as much as I love Monk, I think those 2 are probably better prospects. But I'm really high on Monk. I mean, if the Lakers were to trade, I don't think they would at this point, but if they were to trade like for the 5th and 10th pick, I think Monk would probably be number 1 on my board at the 5 spot, just because he'll bring just right away an elite skill to the NBA that the Lakers badly needed last year.
I'm glad you brought up that trade because I was – oh, Pete, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that I think the fact that we haven't worked him out speaks to the fact that they're not particularly interested in that 5 and 10 package that Sacramento's offering. Because I totally agree with you, Jacob. He's a guy that he would be able to step in right away, and I do think he's got some combo guard ability. But yeah, I think they're staying at 2.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you. I mean, what your thoughts on that possibility? There's been so much like kind of fan chatter about that. Although there's been, I mean, there was one report that Sacramento might be looking to move up. But yeah, it just, to me, it makes sense for both sides to kind of stay where they are, because Sacramento just hit the reset button in February, trading DeMarcus Cousins. So it's like having 2 top 10 picks is very valuable, unless they're just sold on a guy like Lonzo Ball that can, as a guy that can change their culture and things like that. But I think because with the Lakers, I don't think they need to add a ton more youth. I think they've got a pretty good foundation in place, and adding, another key piece at number 2, and then maybe if you can hit on the 28th pick, that's great. But I don't know if any of you guys disagree with me on this, but I mean, I like the idea of just staying at 2 and just getting, one of probably the 3 consensus top guys in this draft.
Yeah, that's something that I try to look at it not necessarily as numbers or draft positions, but if you told me I'd want to know who's going to be there at 5 and who's going to be there at 10. And then, if you're telling me that Dennis Smith is going to fall to 10 and I got a shot at Monk or Tatum at 5, yeah, I listen real hard to that, but if I'm left at 5 and 10, just as numbers and the guys that I really like are not going to be there, then yeah, I'm going to be more reticent, and I'm going to take the guy at 2. And like you said, Gary, the Lakers are doing all right. At in terms of young talent, and they don't really need to add a whole lot more. And what they need is quality rather than quantity in that respect. And like you said, also Sacramento needs to kind of fill up their cupboards again with young talent. So it makes sense in both respects. But Jacob, is that something that you would consider the 2 for 5 and 10 deal?
I think the most intriguing kind of aspect for me to that deal, which I agree, like the deal obviously is a lot easier if you know who's going to be there at 5, but having the 10th pick to potentially unload one of Deng or Mozgov's contracts to somewhere like Brooklyn or something like that, that kind of makes the deal more intriguing. But it would be really contingent on knowing who was there at number 5. Because there's guys like Monk, like Tatum, that I think can step in and still give the Lakers a huge boost that you could take at 5, while also dealing away the 10th pick and ridding yourselves of one of those massive contracts. But even with that, I agree. I know for a while I was kind of on board with trading for 5 and 10, but the more I've kind of thought about it, the more I've watched Lonzo and Jackson, and the more I basically, you said it, we need quality over quantity at this point. We already have basically a full roster of young kids. Now we don't need to keep adding more kind of 19 and 20-year-olds to this team.
Right. Okay, before we move into the number 28 pick, I've got to ask, because I've got to see you two go at it. I might have to separate you two on this. Pete, you've been I don't want to say like anti De'Aaron Fox, because I know you're not that type of person. And by all accounts, it sounds like De'Aaron Fox is a great kid, and a talented kid. Just not a guy that you're seeing as a good fit with this Lakers team, right?
Yeah, I mean, it goes beyond fit, Gary. I look at the guys around the league who are successful at that particular position, and to me, they can either shoot or they're really fantastic playmakers. Fox is a good playmaker. He's not John Wall. The only reason that gets brought up is because he went to Kentucky. The only reason Kevin Durant got brought up with Brandon Ingram is because they're that size with long arms, right? That is where he's fast. I'll give him that. He's a good finisher around the basket, but he has so far to go with his jumper just to get to okay, that I have a hard time envisioning that. And if he's going to be one of those super athletic types, like a Westbrook or a Wall, right, who aren't even, let's go beyond the playmaking element of it. he's 20 pounds behind those guys at the same age. He's a $170. He's a small dude.
Yeah.
And he's an excellent finisher around the basket. He's a really good defender in space. I don't really like him defensively when screens start happening. What we were talking about earlier in terms of switching, I don't think you can switch with a 70-pound guy at the one. I don't think you can do that effectively. He competes. He's a good kid and all of that. But to me, there are so many holes in his game. Definitely not at number 2. And frankly, I'm not sure I would have him in my top 10. I haven't looked enough at the middle part of this draft with the Lakers at 2 and 28. So there's just kind of a gap in my knowledge in that respect. But I'm much lower on Fox than I am with other people. But I'm curious about Jacob's thoughts on this.
I'm curious. I want to hear the rebuttal.
So I'm not crazy high on Fox, but I am much higher than what Pete is. He I mean, you don't really get athletes like him that come along very often. I mean, he's just kind of one of those feels like one of those kind of crazy athletes that has the speed, has the kind of vertical. I think part of what kind of draws me to him is just kind of his competitive nature. I know everybody's made a huge, probably, or not even probably, they made much bigger deal about this game than should have been. But there is something to take away from that UCLA game where he came up against one of the top prospects, not only in the draft, but at his position, and just kind of took it to him. He wasn't really scared of the moment, and he kind of handled Lonzo on both ends of the court for the most part. And that type of stuff is kind of what I love to see. And I think kind of as I said earlier, the Lakers kind of need some sort of leader. I don't know that necessarily he'd be the vocal leader, but he's the type of guy that will get up in people and really kind of set the tone, especially defensively. And he's not going to back down, I don't think, from competition, and there's some value to that. But I do agree he has a really long way to go with that jumper. I don't have the stats pulled up in front of me, but I think he took something like 23 pointers this year, if that. And I think he made like 7 of them. Like it was a comically low number.
It was a little more than that. I think he hit 20 something and shot 60 something. He shot, I think, 26% or something like that. Gary, I'm sorry, I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but
oh no, you're all right.
The guy that you described, though, Jacob, like the competitiveness and the get up in him and not afraid of the moment, like to me, that's Patrick Beverly, and Beverly developed a jump, and he's a perfect example, right, of a guy that developed a jump shot over time. Where our opinions differ, I think, in the most critical place is I see him as a very good athlete. I don't see him as a freak athlete. I don't see him athletically on the tier of Wall or Westbrook. And I think that even if he was, he's 20 pounds lighter than them at the same age. Like he's got to grow a lot just to get up to that 200 mark, right? Whereas most of these guys are coming into the league. I think both Wall and Westbrook were 190, 195 when they came into the league. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's not enough. Like he doesn't have enough of that mind-blowing athleticism to make up for those holes.
And he's also, I mean, I know I'm contradicting myself, but I mean the size is a concern. He's also only 6'3", so it's not like he's a taller point guard either. But right. He made 17 threes on 69 attempts, so 24.6% from 3 this year.
There you go.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me that everybody kind of points to that Sweet 16 game against UCLA, obviously because it was against Lonzo Ball, even though schematically, I don't know what UCLA was doing for the majority of that game guarding Fox. They pretty much played right into his hands. But I'm surprised nobody really talks, and Jacob's especially going to think this is just me bringing up North Carolina again. But the next game against North Carolina, he shot 4 of 13. He was in a little bit of foul trouble, but he played, I think, about 29 or 30 minutes. But I'd have to go back and watch it because it's been a long time since I watched the full game. I've watched that Luke May shot over and over at the end, but but no, it seemed like he really kind of struggled with the size of North Carolina. And, you know, Carolina had guys that are 6'9" and 6'10", you know, not 7-footers. I mean, they had Tony Bradley off the bench, who's, you know, borderline first round pick. But, you know, when he drove inside, there were a couple plays that he really, really struggled. And one, he just got tied up by 2 Carolina big guys, and he didn't even really get to elevate because he just kind of just blindly ran in and just jumped into traffic, and, you know, he didn't get bailed out with a call. But I'm surprised more people don't kind of talk about that and how he followed up that game. And it was, you know, really not a good performance for either him or Monk, which was, I mean, kind of more a testament to what helps, I think, Justin Jackson in his draft stock. But yeah, no, I mean, it's just always interesting to me that people label, you know, they just look at that one game and they put so much stock into that. I mean, I don't mean to take anything away from him, because it was a hell of a game in a big time NCAA tournament matchup. But yeah, that's greatly overblown in my book. And I like De'Aaron Fox. I don't like him right away, especially because I think Pete, kind of to what you've said for a while now, you've got to be able to shoot in this league. Like, you look at these top teams and you know, just the points they put up, the efficiency from 3-point range, like, you've got to have that, especially at the guard position. So, I mean, without that, I don't know. I mean, I just don't know what he is right now. I don't know if he's Alfred Payton, you know, a guy like that. I don't know. Without being able to shoot, it's really tough to project kind of the ceiling of a player like that. So,
yeah, I would have never. I wouldn't have been thrilled with the Lakers taking him at number 2, and I never really had him that high. I mean, to be honest, I've always kind of had Monk higher than Fox on kind of my draft board. But if, like we've mentioned, I mean, if they had traded down to number 5, depending on who was on the board, I mean, I might have considered Fox there, and that was always the scenario I thought back a couple weeks ago when it was coming out that the Lakers seemed to really like Fox. I thought then that maybe they'd consider trading down to number 5 and taking Fox at 5 and trying to pick up an asset. But he was never someone I would have really been crazy about drafting at number 2. But I basically just wanted to poke it at Pete during this.
That's what we got Jacob for, always. All right. Before we sign off of this thing, let's talk a little bit about the number 28 pick. As I mentioned earlier in the podcast, or I think I mentioned this before we went on, I can't even remember, but it's tough to project, you know, who's going to be available here, because the draft is always so unpredictable. I think last year was the perfect example of that. After like 8, I think last year's draft was all sorts of drunk, but I mean, Pete, I'll just throw it to you first. I mean, who are a couple of guys that you think could really, really help the Lakers at number 20 that might be realistically available in that range?
The couple of guys that come to mind, I'd really liked, I did a De'Aaron Fox video, I did a Malik Monk video, and in the process of doing both of those, I'm like, who the hell is this number 3 kid, right? Because I purposely didn't watch a lot of college basketball because I didn't want to really I wanted to go into my videos with an open mind about all of the prospects, right? And kind of make up my own mind rather than follow the narrative. But in both of those, I'm like, this kid's like switching on to point guards. He's dunking on people's faces, which is, you know, I have a fondness for guys who can do that, right? And he's got
dunking's a lot of fun.
Yeah, great mobility. I've seen him in some workouts afterward, and if you know, our listeners aren't aware, that's Bam Adebayo. I really like him. I think there's some concerns with him as a rim protector mentality wise. He's capable of it, and there were a couple games where he had, you know, 6-7 blocks. And I want the Lakers to get somebody. We need a big who can switch and defend effectively on the perimeter. And I think he's a credible role threat. And I think he's got more ball handling perimeter ability than he probably showed at Kentucky. Mm-hmm. He was, I think, the 7th ranked prospect in his high school class coming into last year. And as you mentioned earlier, Jacob actually mentioned that Calipari pigeonholes his centers too, right? Mm-hmm. And they gave Bam a bunch of post touches that just, you know, made me face palm while watching it. Like, you're just totally using this kid wrong. So he's a guy I'm a big fan of that could be available at 28. I really like Derek White out of Colorado, the guard prospect. I think he's, he's like 37 years old, so that's a downside. But he is possibly this year's Malcolm Brogdon. He's just a really solid two-way player that he's got a pretty low ceiling, I would say, but he knows how to play. He's a good shooter. He's a good defender, operates well off of the pick and roll. He's a good spot up guy. Like his weaknesses are very few. I think he projects right into that, Patrick McCaw type of style of player. Brogdon, as I said, it is another one. And I could be talked into TJ Leaf. Even though I'm not sure he'll be available at that spot. The Lakers don't have a single guy under contract right now, including D'Angelo. He's the closest, who shot the league average from 3-point range last year. That was 35.8%. D'Angelo shot 35.1. Wow. The next closest guy that shot even close to that was Clarkson at 32.9%, and he was the fifth worst three-point shooter of anybody who was qualified for the three-point leaderboard in the whole league. That's how bad our shooting is. Yeah. So a 6'10" guy who can pick and pop, you could talk me into him,
Yeah, and he was just scorching from three this year at UCLA. Like Leaf is kind of an underrated athlete, I think, a little bit too. A lot of people, kind of point to his defense, and obviously that needs a lot of work, but I was genuinely surprised when I was kind of sat down to watch him on tape. I was like, man, this kid is a pretty good athlete too, at his size and his ability to shoot the ball. I was like, yeah, if he's there, the Lakers already have like 28 power forwards on the roster, but that's definitely something you'd have to consider. So I'm a big believer in Adebayo as well. Kind of the same thing you said, Pete. When I would sit down to watch a guy like De'Aaron Fox or Malik Monk, he was the guy that kind of kept just leaping off the screen to me. His impact, it's just there. It's hard to miss. And yeah, Jacob, you mentioned, Calipari kind of pigeonholing the centers. That's Towns is always the first guy I kind of think of with that, because I watched Towns' high school tape and saw, all the crazy things that he could do at his size. And then I watched how he played at Kentucky, and I was just like, what are they doing? Like, they're really limiting this kid. But and Adebayo is still very young too, so he's not this type of prospect. Because usually a lot of these guys at the end of the first round or early second are guys that stayed a couple years, and they're not quite as young. They don't have, they don't get labeled with the type of upside that a one and done player might get. But Bam is that. So there's a lot of intrigue for me there with him as well. Jacob, who else would you add to that list?
Well, I just said one thing, how Pete said that Bam kind of jumped off the screen for him. I didn't watch a ton of UCLA games during the season. If I was up that late watching basketball, it was typically the Lakers. But whenever I would watch, I didn't really know a whole lot other than Lonzo. I knew that they had a really good class. TJ Leaf was always the one who kind of jumped off the screen for me. Just his ability it felt like to shoot from just about anywhere. Which is really important for Lonzo, basically, to have the floor as spaced as possible and to give him shooters. But the two guys that I've kind of settled on at that spot, one of them is Semi Ojeleye at SMU. The dude is just a monster. He's 6'7", 235 pounds, I believe. He actually was 241 at the combine. But has a 40-inch vert. He's just he just looks like a monster. Like, just looking at him is almost terrifying. He did hit 42% from three last year, on about 5 attempts a game. So he has that, but he's a guy that he just kind of does a little bit of everything, and he has the offensive game to come in and help. And I think one of the kind of more underrated needs that the Lakers have, I don't know if it's underrated or not, but is wing players. I mean, just kind of true, kind of small forward, 3-and-D type of guys. Because really, I mean, Nick Young and Brandon Ingram are probably our two best 3-and-D guys, and one of them didn't play D. So Ojale feels like the type of guy that can come in, be a 3-and-D guy, but also play a lot of small ball. I could see him as a 4, and maybe even, I mean, we saw the Cavs and Warriors run Durant and LeBron at center. I mean, he could be that type of guy with just kind of how big he is. The other guy that I really loved watching, especially in the tournament, and I think he's underrated, at least Draft Express, is Jordan Bell. He was a monster. I know Gary can attest to this. For much of the UNC game, he was too. But
poor Isaiah Hicks.
Yeah, I know. Bell was just a monster, especially in the tournament. He's 6'8.5", 6'11" wingspan, but I mean, 8.7 rebounds a game, 2.3 blocks a game. There's concerns, especially with the Lakers. He's another big guy who can't really stretch the floor, but I think his defensive ability would more than make up for that. He feels it's not a kind of a direct comparison, but he'd be a kind of a cheaper version of Tariq Black, and a younger version as well. But he's someone I really like, and if the Lakers are looking to add to the front court, I mean, if he's there and they took him, I'd be kind of ecstatic with that pick.
Yeah, I like Bell a lot. I like his ability to switch a lot of things defensively. You obviously don't want him switching everything, but he's very quick laterally for somebody that size and that big. So yeah, definitely like him too. So it's gonna be interesting to see how the draft plays out, because I feel like there's such a surplus of 4s and 5s in this draft that I could see a lot of teams reaching early on like the 2s and the 3s, like the perimeter players, because there's a shortage to me of those type of guys. And just like I said, a surplus of the big men, and maybe teams kind of think, I'm going to get my wing player now or my guard now, and I'll come back to the bigs later on. So, but the draft is always nuts. We just never really know. So,
I know we said this before, but it feels from about like the 15th pick on or so. Once you kind of get out of the lottery, it could be anybody that could go at any point, and it wouldn't really surprise me. I mean, the 15 to 60 is about one big mess in the draft this year.
Yeah, there's going to be somebody available at 28 that we will not have talked about in all of our collective podcasts.
Yep.
Because we had no idea that he was going to be available. I think that was Deonta Davis last year, right? And
Scott Labissiere too, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he was the 28th pick, right? Or he was very close to it, if not. And so, yeah, it's you kind of pick out a couple of guys, and they're so close together. And, Gary, you mentioned about TJ Leaf's defense, right? And, well, it's like, yeah, that's why he's available at 28, and you're going to find something, another guy is Caleb Swanigan, who, is massive guy that can shoot. For me, he like crosses the threshold of bad defender, where even at 28, I can't do it. But, all of these guys, if you want to make an argument against them and the reason why you shouldn't pick them, you're going to succeed. So, at that point in the draft, I enjoy it. There are guys that specialize in it and love it. But for me, I mean, I know for a fact we're going to be sitting there going, I can't believe this guy's on the board right now. Yep. We never thought this would happen, but it's going to happen, and we all know that.
Every single year. It happens every single year. And then there's guys that you can't believe went as high as they did, like Thon Maker last year, going number 10. That was pretty wild to me at the time. But I'm down with the Lakers drafting Swanigan just to see Jacob's reaction.
I quit. I'm done with the Lakers if they draft Swanigan. I can't root for him.
That'd be great. But no, this is great stuff, guys. Pete, I want to thank you so much for coming on. I could talk basketball with you all day, but I know how you are, how much you're against like 3-hour podcasts. So, so we'll cut this off at about an hour. It was great talking to you. I love always talking basketball with you. And if you're listening to this and you don't follow Pete already on Twitter or like him on Facebook or subscribe to him on YouTube, you got to do it. Puts out consistently great Lakers content. It's always must-see stuff, and highly, highly recommend. And, if you're in Summer League this year, definitely, I've had a couple of people reach out to some of us at Lakers Outsiders, but definitely watch a game with Pete, and you'll feel a lot smarter, or maybe a lot dumber, I guess, when it's done. But Pete, again, thank you so much for coming on.
Guys, I'm really looking forward to hanging out with you at Summer League again.
I can't wait. I'm counting down the days, like I said. So, Jacob, I want to thank you as well for coming on with us. A little disappointed in your defense of De'Aaron Fox, but I'll let it slide this time.
You're soft. I'm folding my arms right now. You're soft, Jacob.
I have no comment. I was not prepared. I didn't do my research. I'd like to apologize to all my fans. I'll come back stronger next time.
You'll rise up.
I'll rise up. 100%. I'll rise up for the next podcast.
Oh, man. Good God. All right. If you enjoyed the podcast, you can follow us or subscribe to us on iTunes and on YouTube. Like I said, you can find Pete's work over at LakerFilmRoom.com. You can also find his podcast on iTunes as well. I want to thank the viewers that tuned in. We had a pretty good crowd for this one. And I kind of figured we would be, because we had a very, very good guest on. But thank you, too, for joining me. Thanks to the viewers. We'll be having a podcast here probably in the next couple of days. There's a certain Cleveland Cavalier that's there's a lot of free agent rumors already starting about him coming to Los Angeles. So we'll talk about that next time. But thank you guys again for joining me. Thanks for those tuning in. And this is Gary Kester for the Lakers Outsiders signing off.